The clink of silverware against my plate was the only sound in the room, steady and almost mocking in its calmness. Across the table, John was folding his shirts like he'd done 1,000 times before, sliding them into that same suitcase that seemed to live half in our dining room, half in airports. He smiled so easily, his voice light and cheerful, as if leaving me behind was just another harmless routine. He leaned in, kissed my cheek, and for a second I wished I could believe the warmth meant more than habit. "Another week, another business trip," he said, his tone so smooth it could have been a line from a script he knew by heart. I tried to return the smile, but it felt stiff, plastered on my face while inside I was sinking. Every time that suitcase closed, I felt a little piece of us shutting down too. I didn't tell him that, of course. I just nodded, because that's what he expected. Silent support, no questions asked. But inside, something was stirring. My doubts had always been whispers I managed to drown with his reassurances. Yet tonight, when the zipper slid shut, the sound didn't feel ordinary. It felt sharp, final, like a warning bell I couldn't ignore. And as I sat there watching him move around the room so confidently, I realized my heart had already started asking questions I was too afraid to speak out loud. I remember staring at his hands as he tucked away another tie, neat and precise, like every detail of his life had its place. Except me. I was there, sitting right in front of him, but I felt like the afterthought in the corner of his suitcase. He told me again it was all for us, for our future. Words meant to soothe, but they fell flat, like wallpaper covering a crack in the wall. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But belief requires trust, and mine was beginning to slip. I watched the way he moved around the room, humming under his breath, tapping his fingers against the table as if nothing weighed on him. Meanwhile, my chest felt heavy, like every breath had to push past something lodged deep inside. He looked at me with those easy eyes, expecting me to nod along, to give him permission to keep living this rhythm. I forced myself to stay quiet, because asking the wrong question might unravel everything. And yet, I couldn't help noticing the distance, an invisible wall growing between us, brick by brick, every time he left. He thought I couldn't feel it, but women notice these things. The way his laugh didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. The way his phone never left his side even when he slept. I tucked those observations away, like tiny clues in a mystery I hadn't yet admitted I was solving. That night, after he zipped the suitcase shut, I lingered at the doorway, watching him like I was seeing a stranger wear my husband's face. He kissed my forehead, whispered that tired promise, "Trust me," and walked out with the kind of confidence that made me feel small. I stood there, clutching the edge of the table, my fingers pressing so hard against the wood I could almost hear it creak. When the door clicked closed behind him, the silence in the house became deafening. No humming, no footsteps, just the echo of his absence bouncing through the rooms. I tried to distract myself, cleaning dishes, straightening cushions, pretending normal still lived here, but my mind kept circling back to that suitcase. It wasn't just luggage anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that his life seemed to exist in two halves, and I was only allowed to see one. I went to bed restless, my heart racing like it was bracing for something I couldn't yet name. I stared at his side of the bed, empty and untouched, and the weight of it all pressed against my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into his absences. But deep down, a small, stubborn voice whispered that something wasn't right, and little did I know, the proof of it would find me sooner than I ever expected. The next morning, I was halfway through my coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't recognize the number, and for a second I thought about ignoring it, but something made me swipe it open. The message was short, almost hesitant. "Hi, I think we need to talk. My name is Sarah. I'm John's wife, too." At first I laughed, a sharp, nervous laugh that didn't sound like mine. Who would send something so cruel? My hands shook as I stared at the words, reading them over and over until the letters blurred. A prank, I told myself. Some awful mistake. But the way she wrote, plain, direct, with that heartbreaking too, it clawed at me. My stomach turned cold, the kind of chill that seeps right into your bones. I tried to breathe, but every inhale felt like I was swallowing glass. Before I knew it, I had already pressed the call button, my thumb trembling against the screen. The ringing felt endless, my pulse hammering louder with every second. And then she answered. Her voice wasn't mocking or cruel. It cracked, like it belonged to someone carrying the same weight I was. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't a joke. This was a truth I wasn't ready to hear, but couldn't run from anymore. Please tell me this is some sick joke, I blurted the moment I heard her breathe on the other end. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was shaky, strangled, desperate. For a second, I prayed she'd laugh, tell me she had the wrong number, that it was all a mistake. But instead, there was silence, and then a sigh so heavy it felt like it carried years of pain. I wish it was, she said softly, her words breaking apart like glass under pressure. He told me he was on a business trip this week, but I saw your name on his email. Laura, we're both living the same lie. Hearing my name and her voice nearly split me in two. My knees buckled and I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold tile floor, phone pressed against my ear like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The world spun. I wanted to scream, to hang up, to deny it all. But instead, I whispered, "No, no, no." Over and over, as if repetition could undo the truth. She stayed quiet on the other end, her silence screaming louder than words ever could. That silence told me she'd been here before, crying in kitchens, staring at walls, waiting for a man who was never really hers. And in her pain, I heard my own. I sat there on the kitchen floor, clutching the phone like it was burning me. Every corner of the room suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I had woken up in someone else's life. The photos on the wall, the smell of coffee still in the air, they mocked me, reminders of a marriage that wasn't mine alone. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else, even the sound of Sarah quietly crying on the other end. Questions tumbled through me, faster than I could form them. How long? How many times had I kissed him goodbye while he walked straight into her arms? Did he tell her the same lies about our future? The same lines he fed me with that easy smile? The thought made my stomach twist, and I pressed my hand against it, as if I could hold the sickness in. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, "We need to meet." The words came out steady, stronger than I felt inside. Sarah hesitated, then agreed, her voice raw but resolute. In that fragile moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. My life as I knew it had already ended. But a new chapter, one I hadn't asked for, was waiting just around the corner. I walked into the cafe with my chest tight, scanning the tables until I saw her. Sarah. She looked nothing like the villain I'd imagined in my head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around a mug that had probably gone cold. And in that instant, I realized she wasn't my enemy. She was my mirror. Another woman caught in the same web of lies. I slid into the seat across from her, my palms damp, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "So," I said, my voice sharper than I intended, "you're telling me he's been living a double life?" The words tasted bitter, like poison on my tongue. Sarah flinched but nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "For 3 years," she whispered, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. I gripped my cup, slamming it down harder than I meant to, the sound echoing between us. My anger wasn't at her. It was at him. At the years stolen, the lies whispered into my ear while another woman believed she was the only one. And yet, sitting across from Sarah, I felt an unexpected bond forming, a fragile thread of solidarity woven out of heartbreak. Sarah reached into her purse with shaking hands and laid down her evidence like cards in a cruel game. Receipts from hotels, snapshots of text messages, even copies of flight confirmations. My breath caught as I read his words, lines I knew too well, recycled promises sent to her just as they'd been whispered to me. I felt my fists clench, nails digging into my palms until it hurt. "Every trip," she said, voice breaking. "He told me it was work, but he was splitting his time between us, building 2 lives, like we were interchangeable." Her pain washed over me, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Rage flared inside me, hot and sharp, but so did a strange, hollow grief. 3 years of lies weren't just hers. They were mine too. I finally looked up from the pile of proof, my voice shaking but strong. He thought he was smart, I said, each word slicing the air between us, dividing his time, juggling his stories. But he forgot one thing. No lie stays buried forever. Sarah met my eyes, and in her gaze I saw it. The spark of something shifting. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was resolve. The cafe around us faded into background noise, the clinking cups, the low hum of conversation. None of it mattered. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, heavy and uneven, as if my body was bracing for a war. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand, and I realized we were no longer two strangers bound by coincidence. We were soldiers standing on the same battlefield. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. He thinks he's untouchable. That he can keep juggling, lying, and will just keep playing along. My words trembled, but the fire underneath them burned steady. Sarah nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line. It wasn't just grief anymore that filled her expression. It was fury taking shape. In that moment, I felt the shift inside me. The Laura who once accepted his stories, who smiled through her doubts, was gone. What remained was a woman who knew the truth, and a woman sitting across from me who carried the same scars. And together, we were beginning to imagine what justice, no, what revenge, might actually look like. The day John came home, I was waiting, but I wasn't alone. Sarah sat beside me on the couch, her presence both unsettling and comforting, like the physical proof of everything I had feared. When the front door opened and John stepped inside, suitcase in hand, he froze. His eyes widened as if he'd walked straight into a nightmare he couldn't wake from. "Laura? Sarah?" His voice cracked, disbelief dripping from each syllable. He looked from one of us to the other, confusion flickering into panic. I stood, my heart pounding but my body steady, almost eerily calm. "Cut the act," I said, my words cold enough to slice through the air. "We know everything." For once, John's smile faltered. The easy charm he carried like armor was gone, replaced by sweat gathering at his temples. He stammered, searching for a script that didn't exist anymore. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her voice dripping with venom. "So, how was your business trip? Productive?" His face paled, and in that silence, I felt the first flicker of power return to me. He tried to recover, fumbling for words the way a drowning man grabs at air. "I can explain," he began, his voice trembling. But I cut him off before he could weave another excuse. "Explain how you married 2 women and lied to us both. Explain how every suitcase you packed was stuffed with betrayal." My voice was rising now, sharp and unrelenting, and for once he had nothing to lean on. His mouth opened, then closed again, like the truth itself had locked his throat shut. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing in front of us, desperate to find an escape route. But there was none. Sarah's laugh broke the silence. Short, bitter, the sound of years of humiliation curdled into rage. "God, you really thought you were untouchable, didn't you? That we'd never compare notes." I crossed my arms, my eyes never leaving his face. Watching him squirm, watching the color drain from his cheeks, I felt a strange mix of heartbreak and satisfaction. For years, I'd been the one left with questions. Now, finally, he was the one stumbling over answers. And I wasn't about to let him slip away with half-truths and apologies. He finally stopped pacing and sank into the armchair, his shoulders slumped, his suitcase still by the door like some silent witness to his lies. "I never meant to hurt either of you," he muttered, his voice thin, stripped of all that usual bravado. Hearing him so small should have softened me, but instead it fueled something deeper. Hurt us? He had carved years out of our lives and filled them with fiction. That wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Sarah leaned forward, her tone steady, almost surgical. "Do you realize we both mourned the same absences? The same excuses? You built 2 homes out of sand and thought they'd never collapse. John buried his face in his hands, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. I had wasted too many nights believing his promises. Now I saw him clearly. Not a husband, not even a man, just a coward hiding behind plane tickets and hotel receipts. I stood tall, letting the silence stretch until he lifted his head to meet my eyes. Your empire of lies ends tonight, I told him, my voice low but certain. His lips parted like he wanted to beg, to bargain. But something in my gaze must have told him there was no way back. Not with me, not with Sarah. And in that charged moment, I knew the real reckoning hadn't even begun. I glanced at Sarah, and without a single word, we both knew. We weren't just confronting him, we were ending him. That unity, that silent agreement between 2 betrayed women, gave me more strength than I'd felt in months. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Photos, copies of emails, even the overlapping marriage certificates. I tossed them onto the coffee table, the papers scattering like fallen cards in a rigged deck. John's face went pale as his own lies stared back at him in black and white. He reached for the papers, fumbling, trying to gather them up like spilled secrets, but I stopped him with a sharp glare. Don't bother, I said. They're already copied, and they'll be in more hands than yours tonight. His eyes darted to Sarah, desperate, but she was no longer the woman begging for truth. She was steel. We're filing for divorce, she declared firmly, her voice steady in a way that silenced the room. And not just that, we're sending everything to your boss. The color drained further from his face, and for the first time, he seemed to understand the scale of his collapse. Every trip, every excuse, every carefully built lie, it was all about to unravel in public. He opened his mouth, desperate to salvage what was left. Wait, Laura, please, you don't understand. I did this for us, for stability, for... His excuses fell apart as I laughed, sharp and humorless, cutting through the room like a blade. For us? I repeated, my voice dripping with ice. John, you weren't building a future. You were running a circus, juggling lies until they caught fire in your hands. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so he had no choice but to hear every word. You thought we'd never talk, that you could keep us separated like compartments in your suitcase. But you underestimated us. And now, we're done playing wives. We're your reckoning. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged, the kind that comes right before everything collapses. Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers quick, deliberate. Your boss is going to get all of this before midnight, she said. And when he does, those trips you loved so much, they'll vanish. No job, no reputation, nothing. John's face crumpled, his hands trembling as he tried to reach for me. But I stepped back, letting the space between us speak louder than anything I could have said. Watching him unravel was almost surreal. This man who once strutted through airports with confidence, who wore lies like a tailored suit, was now crumbling in front of us. His shoulders shook, his voice cracked as he begged, "Don't do this. Please, I can fix it." But his pleas bounced off us like raindrops against stone. There was nothing left to fix. He had built this ruin with his own hands. I picked up one of the marriage certificates from the table, holding it up so he couldn't escape its truth. You wanted 2 wives? I said, my tone sharp as glass. Congratulations, John. Now you'll have none. I let the paper fall back onto the pile, the sound final, like a gavel striking down in court. Sarah's chin lifted proudly, her voice steady as steel. You played both of us, but you forgot something. We're stronger together than you ever imagined. In that moment, I didn't feel broken anymore. I didn't feel like the discarded wife waiting for answers. I felt powerful, united, alive. His empire of deceit had collapsed in his own living room, and he was the one left choking on the dust. As Sarah and I stood side by side, I knew this wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of our freedom and the perfect strike of revenge. Months later, I found myself back at the same cafe where everything had shifted. The light through the windows was softer, warmer, as if the world itself had decided to ease up on me. Sarah walked in, her shoulders no longer carrying the weight of secrets, her smile cautious but real. We hugged like old friends, not strangers bound by betrayal. We had both been broken, but now we were whole. Over steaming mugs of coffee, we shared stories. Not about John, not anymore, but about ourselves, about rediscovering who we were before his lies tangled around us. Sarah laughed, a sound freer than I'd ever heard from her, and I realized I was laughing too. The ache in my chest had loosened, replaced by something unfamiliar yet liberating. Peace. We weren't victims anymore. We were survivors. I raised my cup toward her, a quiet toast between two women who had been forged in fire. Turns out, I said with a smile, letting go of him was the best thing we ever did. She nodded, her eyes shining with agreement. And in that moment, I knew the sweetest revenge wasn't his downfall, it was our freedom. We didn't just lose a liar, we gained our lives back.